Hello everyone, and welcome back to the web feed. My name is James King, and today we're going to do something a bit different. We're going to look into the basis of programming and sort of the secrets of how I learn programming languages so quickly. So, here's some of the topics we're going to cover in this episode. It's going to be a bit shorter than the normal, but there will be some of the content coming out as well. So, we're going to be looking at the syntax similarities between languages, the types of stored data, loosely typed versus strongly typed languages, and the secrets of learning new languages quickly. So let's have a look at some of the syntax similarities. Some languages share the same or similar syntax, and we can use it to learn a new language quickly. For example, PHP, Java, and JavaScript all write if statements, switch statements, for, while, try, and catch, and a few others as well in the exact same way, which is strange, but is very useful to us. So let's have a look at types. Now, in programming, when you store data, you store it in like a variable in a certain type. So let's have a look at a few of these types, shall we? So the first one is called a string. A string in programming is a length of characters which is greater than 1. If it's 1, it's noted as a char, or a character. It is just one character. It's also known as NS string in Objective-C. And there's an example. You have to use quotes when you use a string. That defines it as a string. So it can either be double or single quotes. I've just used double in the example. So banana, which is a string. Let's have a look at integer. An integer is defined as a whole number, which can be positive or negative. Cannot be a decimal, cannot be sort of a fraction. So any whole number. It's also known as NS integer. It's more commonly just known as int. And there's an example there. So you don't use quotes, you just literally put the physical number in. So it's the number 12. Let's have a look at floats and doubles. A float or a double is exactly the same as an integer, but it has a decimal place, so it's not a whole number. So, wow, just put NS there. I was supposed to say NS float, and there's an example 1.2. Boolean. A Boolean value is an entity which can only be in two states. It can only be true or false. Cannot be anything else, cannot be null, can only be true or false. By null, I mean null is like an empty value. It's the same as void in Java and Objective-C, and nil in Objective-C. Yeah, null is just like an empty value, doesn't exist, sort of empty memory state. This can only be true or false. So it can also be known as NS bool or just bool. And there's an example there. Just put true. Let's have a look at an array. Now, if you've been watching PHP 101, you'll come across arrays. You'll come across a lot of these types actually in PHP. I will be doing some tutorials for the other languages as well. May do some on Java. So an array is an entity which stores a list of multiple values. It's also known as NS array. And there's an example of an array there. So you define your array and then you put each item in, which I've just put 3 strings in there. You can put integers in there, or booleans in there. You can put any other type in with it. I've just used strings in these examples. And lastly, an object. An object is used in object-oriented programming. It's defined by classes in most languages. So it's sort of like your own custom type. So you could make a user object, and then everything that you created from that user object would be defined as a user type. So it's your own custom types, if you will. So it's also called NS object or just class. In PHP they're defined as classes, and then when you instantiate them, each single of it is an object. Let's have a look at some of the behaviours of types. So let's have a look at the behaviour of a string. So this is how you write it. There it is in PHP. There it is in JavaScript. The var shouldn't have a capital V. I don't know why PowerPoint has put that on. And it should be capital in that third example, which is Java. You can see in Java I've had to use the word string twice. That's because you have to define the type in Java. We'll be looking at that later on in this episode, about defining the type. And in Objective-C, again, you have to define the type, which we've used NSString. And you have to use an @ sign, oddly. I don't really know why. So yeah, that's PHP, JavaScript, Java, and Objective-C. Let's have a look at how you would define an integer. In PHP, you literally do it without the quotes. You can put a space before that equals sign, I probably should have. Again, var integer equals 12 in JavaScript, which the var shouldn't have a capital V there. PowerPoint keeps doing that. And that's in Java. You define it as an int and an NS integer in Objective-C. Oddly enough, in Objective-C there is one called NS number. Not really explored what the key difference is yet. I think it's to do with storing floats and integers together. I don't really know. Okay, so a float is with the decimal place. That's how you do it in PHP, JavaScript, Java, and Objective-C, which strangely enough I couldn't find anything to do with NS float. But I may be wrong with the Objective-C. I've only been learning it for 2 weeks now, so I'm a little bit new to it. Okay, Boolean. So again, in Java you have to define it as a bool and an NS bool in Objective-C. I'm just going to go through these quickly. An array, there it is defined in PHP. You have to actually call, it's like an array function, which creates your array, and then you put your items in it, comma separated. Same sort of thing in JavaScript, except you have to use the new keyword, which we'll be going over in the PHP 101 tutorials, because PHP does use the new keyword as well. Oddly, this may confuse you, but in Java you have to define the type of the array firstly. The type of the array here. So the 2 square brackets together defines that it's a string, it's an array of strings, so this can only store strings. And you have to define how many items there is, so I'm only going to put 1 item in it. Which is even more odd, you have to actually define the limit of the array. I've never really got that, because PHP you can put as many as you want. You can even add stuff on later on in the script, you can actually add to it. Whereas in Java you have to actually define how many there is in your array. And I haven't really explored it in Objective-C enough yet. And then object, which we can't really explain because they're defined as classes and therefore they're a lot more complicated. Like you can make a class that's the size of 100 lines of code if you wanted to. And let's have a look at the loosely typed versus strongly typed. Somebody asked me this. They said, "What do you mean by loosely typed and strongly typed languages?" I'm going to go over this now. A strongly typed language, for each element you create, you must define its type. The type then cannot be changed or overridden with another type, but it can still be overridden by a different object of the same type. You must remember that. If it's the same type, it can still be overridden. So Java is strongly typed, Objective-C strongly typed, C, C#, and C++ are all strongly typed languages. They tend to be the more powerful languages that do that. And here's some examples here. This is Java. We're creating a new string called hello. And then later on we can set that hello to howdy. We can override that keyword. You notice I haven't done the type on the second line because it's already defined first. So we're overriding it. We don't have to define it again. So that can only store a string. Loosely typed languages, you don't have to define a type for each element. You can still force a type if you like, which I'm going to show you how to do. The object can be overridden by the same object name in any type. So let's have a look at these. PHP is loosely typed, JavaScript, Ruby, Python, Perl. All of those are loosely typed. This should say loosely typed in the title. So $hello is hello in PHP. You notice we didn't have to define a type in there. Later on I can change it to a boolean and set it to false. And here's how you define that you want a string and only a string. You could do a function here and you can make the parameter force it to be a string. So if you gave that anything else in PHP like an array, PHP would then throw an error. So you can actually force a type if you really want to. That should say loosely typed. Manipulating types. Okay. Strings have some extra methods added which can enable you to get the length, remove white space, change the case, etc., etc. You can even split it in half and turn it into an array, stuff like that. Each language is different. Here is a string in PHP, and if you do echo strlen and give it the string, that will give you the length of the string, so that would equal 5 because it's 5 letters long. So have a look at integers. They can be manipulated by maths, which the other types can't, and they can also be converted to strings quite easily. Like here is an int in PHP, and I can do int is equal to itself plus 10. So that would make int equal 22 because we've just added 10 to it. Floats, they work pretty much the same as an integer. You can still use math on them as like that. Actually, that should be $float there. Wow, the amount of mistakes in this PowerPoint is unbelievable. And that would make it equal 11.2. Sorry about that. Boolean. It can only be true or false. It can't be anything else. And cannot be converted to anything else easily. Here's a way you can convert it if you use an if statement in PHP. So if you do if boolean, so if that's true, then we can echo out the boolean is true, and etc. You can do your own else there. Arrays. Arrays can have indexes passed, can be sorted, and can be looped through. A lot of things can be done with arrays. In PHP, you can use print_r and give it the array to output the arrays and map as a string. And objects. Objects can only be manipulated by the classes that the developer has defined, because they're our own custom types. Say if I've got a type of dog, say if I've created a class for a dog, each new dog would be of type dog. So as you know in Java, you would have to do dog and then the name of the dog equals new dog. So you would have to define the type still, but you have to call it dog. So really, they can only be manipulated by how we do them. You can do like a toString method in JavaScript and Java, which if you call the dog and try and echo it or put it on the page, it will use that function to convert it to a string, which is how the developer has defined it, so how we define it. And thanks for watching. I know this PowerPoint's been riddled with mistakes, but I hope that that's given you some insight on how I learn languages so quickly and how you can use your knowledge of types and how they work in all languages that you learn. So please hit like if you like this episode and subscribe for more. Check out our PHP 101 series if you haven't. The playlist is on the channel homepage, so you can go through and learn PHP step by step. I'm posting episodes daily now, so hopefully you'll be able to learn PHP pretty quickly. So, thanks for watching.